This is Terry with Terry's Doing It, and I am sitting in with Dan
Wake.
from not from Boulder.
No, from Denver. You and I are at least in the same time zone. So,
Thank you so much for joining me. I've been really excited to get you on and to hear all about what you've been up to. I met you. Well, you tell us how did we meet?
well, we met just a couple of weeks ago in Corte Madera, California, at something called the Book Passage Travel Writers Conference, and it was a lot of fun for me and very enlightening for me because I'd never been there before. I didn't really know what to expect. It turned out to be a lot of fun, and as it happened, someone else there, Tiffany Hawk, introduced you and I. She thought that my story might apply to your podcast, and here we go.
Well, I'm so glad she did. Um, as listeners know, our focus is on people who follow their passions to do what they're really excited about, and you certainly have done that several times.
Yeah, different stages. You have to try to find times in my life where I could do things a little bit out of the ordinary, but at the same time, you know, hey, I was a lawyer for 35 years, and so I sort of tried to make that work at the same time doing the stuff that was more fun. Because believe it or not, practicing law isn't necessarily all that much fun. But
I hear that a lot from lawyers.
Yeah, I think collectively speaking, lawyers are not the happiest people in the world. There's advantages to it, and it sort of worked for me. I'm not complaining. I had a nice career. A lot of things went well for me, but it's stressful, and there were times where I didn't like it so much, and so it helped to have these other outlets to sort of have more fun.
Sure. Were you a trial lawyer?
I was a trial lawyer. 95% of what I did was litigation and trial work. And like I say, that's exciting. It's challenging, but it's also just nothing but conflict pretty much all day, every day. He's dealing with conflict, and you can't complain because you take it on willingly. But on the other hand, sometimes, dealing with people's problems. I used to say I never got involved until after Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall, and we're trying to put it back together, and so yeah, that was good and bad. But I retired from that 8 years ago, so that's not my thing anymore.
Well, so frequently you see a child who's very argumentative, and people say, you should be a lawyer. Were you argumentative as a child?
I bet. That's hard to say, but the answer is probably yeah. The answer is
Yeah.
probably yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but that's kind of a stereotype. Although you find out in litigation, the people who are most argumentative are almost the least effective. The best lawyers,
That.
the best lawyers in litigation, in my opinion, were the ones who argued less and could solve problems. It's really about trying to solve problems. That's in it. Not to go too far down the road of being a lawyer, but I always thought it was interesting that if you're in litigation, there are all kinds of lawyers, right? There's tax lawyers and real estate lawyers, and there's all kinds of things. But if you're in litigation, it's a weird life. It's a weird practice because even if things go beautifully, even if you do the best possible result, you get the best possible result, your client hopes they never see you again. And so it's just kind of a weird profession.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Well, we are not here to talk about the
No.
law, although we'll probably talk about it a little more. We're here to talk about travel and writing and your passion that was was strong enough to keep drawing you back to it time after time after time. So let's talk a little bit about the progression that you went through from child to youth to professional attorney to retiree. Um, but first, I want to kind of give it a framework. You shared with me part of your book, and you wrote that the best travel is more about the journey than the destination. Though I didn't see it coming, my destination, my destiny, was to be destitute at 30. But this book isn't about the destination you wrote. You said it's about the journey. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I didn't make that up. That the best part about traveling is the journey, not the destination. But I do believe it's true. We travel we travel to see things, and we're lucky if we get to travel. You can see Notre Dame or Angkor Wat or the Grand Canyon. There's lots of great things to see, and that's why we do it, and it's rewarding. But I think what addicted me to travels, and sometimes very lengthy travels, many months at a time, when life would allow that, was not so much the destinations. I totally enjoyed them, but the unexpected things that happen in between destinations or instead of destinations. Typically, they're fascinating people that you meet or just some sort of event you stumble onto. Those are to me are the things that were really uh, that do something. That you remember decades later. And so that's why I think that when I look back, I've used the analogy in my life anyway that traveling is sort of like, a good movie that you've seen or a good meal that you've eaten. You may not remember every single part of a great meal. You might remember the entree was spectacular, the dessert was wonderful, or you can go to your favorite movie. You're not really going to remember every scene for 120 minutes, but you're going to remember certain things that really captured you during that movie. And I think traveling is like that. There's just certain things that really resonate very deeply that you never forget. And that's what has always drawn me back to doing it as much as I can.
So I guess you could almost say it's like a series of little vignettes. And experiencing those vignettes is what is so enjoyable.
Yeah, that's dead on. That's dead on for me. And I've fact and found that, well, it really is a lot of the unexpected things. I'll jump in here a little bit. And one of the things I shared with you is that I never even left the state. I grew up in Phoenix. I never left the state of Arizona, I don't believe, until I was 19 years old. That wasn't intentional, but my parents had 9 kids, and they didn't have a lot of money. My dad was a funny guy and all that, but he wasn't very successful. And in raising 9 kids, it's impossible to imagine nowadays what it'd be like to raise 9 kids. But amongst other things, it's expensive, and they didn't really have a lot of money. And so we didn't do vacations. We didn't go to the beach. We didn't travel cross country. We didn't do road trips. We didn't do anything. It's not because they didn't want us to see anything. It's because they really couldn't afford anything more than that. We never went to summer camp. We didn't do any of that stuff, And I decided when I was 19 years old in college that it was time to go see something, to get somewhere in the world. And the only thing I could afford was hitchhiking. I didn't really start out thinking that way. But a buddy and I, at 19 years old in the summer of 1976, happens to be our nation's bicentennial, we went hitchhiking around to Yosemite and to the Grand Canyon, to the Yellowstone, Grand Teton National Park. And that was the first time I'd seen a good chunk of the country. And when I came back, that's wonderful. Those are spectacular things to see, right? What's more beautiful in the world than Yosemite or the Tetons or the like? Those are great things to do. But what I remember more was sort of getting from one park to the other, and just the things that happen and the people you deal with in the process of going from A to B. That was almost as good to me as being at the geysers or whatever it may be, And
Give us an example.
I've talked about. So I kept a journal. First time in my life I'd ever kept a diary, a journal. And in the 5 weeks that we were.
Why do you think you did that?
I don't know, but I'm awfully glad I did. Maybe it's because I knew this was going to be something different. In fact, that was the whole reason for doing it, right? Is to get out of your comfort zone and do something different. And I thought, well, I should write this down. Wisely, I thought, I'll want to remember this, And so
that you presupposed that you would never do it again, that it was a one and done kind of thing?
Oh, that's a fascinating question. We were gone. My buddy and I were gone for 5 weeks in that summer. 5 weeks is a long time to spend on a trip. You're very fortunate to spend 5 weeks. As life progressed, I ended up taking trips that were a lot longer than that, but I certainly didn't see that coming when I was 19 years old. We had sort of cleared the decks to be gone for 5 weeks, and I'm absolutely certain I did think that this was special, and it was special. So I'm glad I wrote it down. But one of the things I wrote down was every ride we got, because we had never hitchhiked before. We had never hitchhiked before. And I wrote down that in the course of 5 weeks, we got 69 rides. And, in a way, that, not to be too Pollyanna about the whole thing, but in a way that was a little bit life affirming, because I didn't really realize it at the time. But then when I got older, you could look back and reflect. When you're standing by the side of the road trying to get a ride, you're asking a lot of a complete stranger. That's why so many people just drive on by. I get it, right? But periodically, some complete stranger would pull over and give you a ride. And that was really, really generous. It gives you a little, a little good feeling about your fellow humanity, But one of the great stories we had from that summer, and I've remembered this forever. Most of the rides, of course, I forgot. That was now 50 years ago, almost 50 years ago, which is pretty hard to believe. But we were outside of Reno, Nevada, going east towards Yellowstone, east and then north towards Yellowstone National Park. We just spent 10 days backpacking in Yosemite. What a glorious thing to do. And we're trying to get to Yellowstone. And in the morning, we got a ride a little bit east of Reno, Nevada, maybe 30 miles east of Reno, Nevada, and got dropped off there on an interchange at Interstate 80. And we set about to keep hitchhiking, maybe 9 o'clock in the morning. Well, no cars stopped. No cars stopped all day long. In fact, the only cars that stopped were people dropping off other hitchhikers. When you're a hitchhiker, there's really two things that you fear the most. One is rain, can't do anything about it. And two is other hitchhikers, because it just decreases the odds that any vehicle is going to pull over and stop for you if there's more people there. Well, during the course of the day, 9 other hitchhikers got dropped at the exact same interchange on Interstate 80. There's now 11 hitchhikers trying to hitchhike east, and no one's stopping. It's sort of high desert in Nevada. People are barreling up through. I totally get that. But this was sort of like the crucible for our summer. And we came close to giving up, maybe going back the other way, hitchhiking back to Reno, take a bus home. And it's interesting to think, for me, it's interesting to think that what if that had happened? We almost caved in. We almost quit. I might have had a very different view of traveling. My first real trip would have sort of felt like a failure, even if it had been fun up until then. But instead of sort of feeling like a failure, what happens is this, about 8 o'clock at night, it's starting to get dark. We've been there 11 hours. A guy in a white pickup truck pulls over, and he's hauling a horse trailer. And he says that he's just got this horse trailer. It's clean as a whistle. He's got 2 hitchhikers in the cab of his truck. He's got 9 hitchhikers in the bed of his truck. And he says anyone who wants to get in the horse trailer can get in. So, of course, we all get in. All 11 of us get into the back of a horse trailer. So this guy now has 22 hitchhikers, I guess. He's a guardian angel for all these hitchhikers, and we take him all the way to Salt Lake, and we get out and we sort of head north towards Yellowstone. And I've just thought of that guy a million times since then, because he saved us in the moment. Just a great guy. I don't know his name. If I saw him tomorrow, I wouldn't know. He's just a guy who helped everybody he saw along the way. And so it helped us in the moment, of course, but it's also just a great story about how people help you when you're on the road. I really just believe that people help you a whole lot when you're on the road.
Sure. Well, I read also that you had another notable ride, that this was on the end of the trip.
We had done 5 weeks. We got all the way back into Phoenix. No one knew we were getting back to Phoenix, because in 1976, of course, there's no cell phones. There's no Google. The iPhones can't track your location. No one knows where you are. Your parents don't know where you are. No one knew we got back into Phoenix. In those days, there was an exit off of 48th Street in Phoenix, for anyone who's familiar with Phoenix. And we had a ride all the way through town. The guy dropped us. He was going on to Tucson. He dropped us at 48th Street for us to go to our house. My parents lived about 2 miles due north on 48th Street. And so my friend Mark and I, we just decided we'd walk that last couple of miles to our house. That'd be a nice kind of poetic way almost to end this trip, end this summer. We'd been hitchhiking, we'd been hiking. We're going to walk we're going to walk to our house, you know? And so we're walking along, and all of a sudden a car pulls over right in front of us. And my first thought was, wow, I'm so good at hitchhiking that I can get a ride when I'm not even trying. I'm really good at this. Well, then I realized I know this car. That car was my dad. My dad was going home after work at the end of the day or middle of the day or whatever the heck it was. And he pulls over. He picks us up. He didn't expect to see us because he didn't know where we were. And he takes us to my house. And I thought that was really, in a way, that captured how lucky the whole summer was, that I ended up getting a ride without even trying to my front door. It's just good karma. And it just gave me a vibe, a sense of karma about traveling in general and hitchhiking and the generosity of people helping you out when you're doing things that really, really stuck with me, you know. So after that summer, the first time I'd ever been out of state, it was sort of like, oh man, I got to do more of this, you know.
For sure. Well, we have talked in the past a little bit about your father, and I want to hear more about your parents shortly, but I have an observation for you, which is that how many of us, like those motorists on Highway 80, blast past hitchhikers without a second look? The fact that he recognized you and stopped tells me that he was very aware that his son was out there somewhere, and he took care of you because he was thinking about his son.
See, now that's the observation of a parent, right?
Yes.
That's how we think. Once we have kids, that's how we think. We know that
Yes.
we are always thinking about them, even if your kids don't think you're thinking about them, you know. But yeah, who knows? Who knows?
Uh,
But it was just really telling you.
Sound pretty fabulous. Your dad, you said, was barely through high school with an education. Your mom was a different story. Kind of describe your atmosphere as you were growing up.
Well, there's an adage in my family. I'm not even an adage, sort of lore. No one can totally prove it, but my parents were very Catholic, and the family lore is that after 5 or 6 kids, they went to the priest and asked if they could use birth control because there's a lot of kids and they can't afford them. And the priest said, as the priest did, no, you cannot use birth control. That was lucky for me because I'm the seventh of the nine. You know, I'm not so sure how lucky it was for my parents because they really struggled. It was very difficult. My mother unquestionably was the brains of the family. My mother, in the 30s, was the valedictorian of her high school. She went to college. She got a degree. She got a pilot. She became a pilot. She became a flight instructor in the 40s. She was very smart and very ambitious. And in another generation or so, who knows where she would have gone had she gone that way in life. But she met my dad, a funny guy, and they got married. And they started on their way to 9 kids really fast. My dad was the exact opposite of my mother. He was not educated. He barely got out of high school. Funny guy, but not the smartest guy in the room, and he struggled to make a living. There was plenty of times when they got up to 9 kids. There were plenty of times when my parents were on welfare, and sort of made it work. Barely made it work, but they made it work. But it was, it was a struggle. So part of me, I do feel like I am absolutely the product of my parents. My mother was smart and she worked hard. I was lucky. I was always really good in school. I was the nerdy kid who did really well in school, and I got that from my mother. And my dad was sort of more the funny guy who liked to tell stories, and like most of my brothers and sisters, we like to tell stories.
What was dinner time like around
Okay,
that table?
chaos. Yeah, yeah. The only thing what I remember, what I complained about, I'm not sure, is they passed the food around according to age. All right. So my dad would eat first, and then would go to my oldest brother and my second, all the way down. I was the seventh. That's why I would always complain about it. By the time it got to me, it was kind of the scraps. But I'm not sure if that's really true or not. But it makes a good story, and
It does make a good story.
yeah. So what the heck? Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, so 8 brothers and sisters. Do they take after your father or your mother? Or both?
Um, I think in that regard, it's amazing. I think for 9 kids, there's a lot of similarity within the 9, And I think there's a lot of academic accomplishment in my family. And that clearly, unquestionably comes from my mother. I have an older brother who went to Harvard Law School, and I ultimately ended up at Stanford Law School. We have a sister, Claire, who got a PhD from, I think it's molecular biology and
Wow.
Rice, and I have a brother who got a master's degree. So there was 4 graduate degrees, 8 undergraduate degrees. Out of the 9 kids, 8 of them went to college and got degrees. And so um, my parents, of course, couldn't help with that. They didn't have the finances to help with that. But luckily, back in those days, if you went to a state university, they were pretty cheap, and so we all had to put ourselves through college. But my parents couldn't help financially, but my parents helped genetically. We got my mom's academic genes, but I think like most of my siblings are like me, and they like to tell stories, and that unquestionably comes from my dad. So for better or for worse, we ended up with both of them.
So you got a ride home with your dad and you went right back to school. Is that what you did?
Yeah. I was the biggest nerd on campus at the University of Arizona. Worked every afternoon on campus to make money at a photocopy shop, and then I studied in the evening and on the weekends. And and that year, which is my junior year of college, I realized I got to do more. I got to do more of this. I had just taken this trip, and I just learned how to hitchhike. And so the following summer, I went to Europe for a summer. Hitched a ride back east, flew to Europe. I spent 3 months hitchhiking around Europe, and because that's the only possible way I could afford it, was to do it as cheaply as possible. And again, it's just remarkable, especially in Europe, even more than the U.S., how common hitchhiking was. It was routine. There would be a jillion hitchhikers, but you'd get around. And there's plenty of times, anyone else who was hitchhiked in Europe in that time frame would agree with this. There's plenty of times people give you a ride, and then they let you sleep on their couch or in the guest room or something like that, and take you back out to the road the next day. The generosity of that sort of stuff is staggering.
Let me stop you there because you shared another story with me about that kind of generosity. Once you share that, the London. Yeah.
So I took a ferry across the English Channel to Dover, the White Cliffs of Dover, the famous White
Right.
Cliffs of Dover. And I slept in a campground there. And then the next morning I got up to hitchhike to London, which was a couple hours north, because of course, if you're going to England, you got to go to London, and a guy picked me up, is in his mid-50s, kind of a quiet guy. He didn't say much, but eventually he said, "Well, how far can I take you? Where are you going?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going into London," and he just about gasped. He said, "Oh, you'll never find a place to stay in London." He said, "There are 1 million people in London right now, 1 million visitors for the Silver Jubilee." Well, back in 1977, at this time, we didn't have the internet. We didn't know everything that was going all around the world. And in Arizona, we didn't pay a whole lot of attention to the British monarchy, the king and the queen. It all just sort of seemed like nonsense. We don't do royalty in the United States. I didn't have a clue. When he said that, I said, "What's a Silver Jubilee?" And so he goes on to explain what a Silver Jubilee is, Queen Elizabeth's 25th anniversary, and as queen, and they got a jillion people in town. But it turns up to be a fantastic time to hitchhike into London, because by the time we got into London, I don't know whether he felt guilty about dropping me off or just sorry that this kid doesn't know what he's doing, and he let me sleep on his couch. And so I spent 5 days in London in 1977 during the Queen's Silver Jubilee, and I'd go play tourist every day. Usually I'd ride the bus in with him. He rode a double-decker bus. We'd go to downtown, and he'd give me an idea of what to do for the day. And then I'd come back at the end of the day, and he had tea and biscuits waiting. It was almost like a surrogate father, taking care of his son for a few days, And what I shared with you was this is just another one of those serendipity things that make you feel that there's good karma, that you're just lucky at this. Part of me wanted to say, I'm really good at this tourism stuff, but it's really just luck. And it's the generosity of people. and serendipity. You just got to count on things happening. During my first day in London, I stumbled across a photographer's pool, or cordoned off place on Marlborough Street, next to St. James Palace. And I just walked in, and they let me into this cordoned off area because I had a big camera. And it turns out they're all photographers, and they're getting ready to film all the prime ministers of the Commonwealth. There's 26 prime ministers of the Commonwealth who have come in for a meeting in conjunction with the Silver Jubilee, and they all walk right in front of us, or as I say, me and my mates, and it's just a great thing. And that again is sort of, it's not really going to St. James Palace that's great. It's what happens on the side that you don't expect to happen, And so those kind of things happen to me a lot that summer. And you can't plan that. You can't get that out of a guidebook. You just have to be there and hope things happen. And it just always seemed like things did happen.
I love that. I like to follow my curiosity, and I frequently find that canceled flights and things like that are just the best, because it happens when you follow your curiosity. Yeah, good.
Yeah, I'll say you got to listen to the travel gods. The travel gods are doing something for you, and so but that's sort of what made it addicting for me. And so it was a kind of an issue because on the one hand, I was a high achieving nerdy kid. I decided when I was about 13 or 14 years old that I was going to be a lawyer. Not entirely sure why I did that. Not entirely sure whether it was wise or not to make a decision that early, but that's what I was going to do. And ultimately that's what I did. So part of me, this guy, if we visualize the responsible guy talking in your ear, the responsible little guy talking in my ear was work hard, get the best grades. And I always did. I was the valedictorian in my 8th grade class. My mother wrote the speech, of course, thank God, and I gave a speech at 8th grade.
Like that.
God bless her,
Yeah.
But anyway, and that continued. I ended up being the top graduate at the University of Arizona. They put my name on a plaque, and it's still there 50 years later. And I went to Stanford Law School, as I mentioned. There was a big part of me that was my identity. I was the smart kid in class. I embraced it. That's how I'm gonna succeed in life. And I'm not gonna lie, I wanted to make money. I saw how my parents struggled without making money, and I saw my ticket is school. That's good. That's what it's going to be. But as the years went on, this other one, the hitchhiker guy over here, just always wanted to go screw around, and not for a few days, for a few months, if possible. And so that's sort of perhaps apropos of your podcast here, Terry, is that's the trade-off. You're trying to reconcile what you need to do to be responsible, because we do need to be responsible, with what you do that really that satisfies that passion and that really makes you want to do more. It's hard you can't only be the hitchhiker guy.
Right.
But if you're only the guy who's trying to be the best at everything, there's a lot to be said for that. That's going to leave you wanting at some point, and so the balance was always, how do you juggle those two?
Sure. I really relate to that because I was very much the same way. And I didn't really start my writing seriously until I retired and then started traveling. So some of us have things that we have to satisfy before we can cut loose. And sounds like we both did that. So I think you talked a little bit about being successful and all the accoutrements. Was that satisfying? And why?
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. Like I said, I did not want, my parents were on welfare. I didn't want to be on welfare. And so while it's arguably pretty shallow to just want to achieve in order to get money, and I'm not saying that's the only reason I wanted to do well, but I wanted to make money. And so to the extent there's a part of you, and there certainly was a part of me that sort of needed that validation of professional success, and to a degree, not always, but to a degree, professional success might be measured in money, in how much you make. That was, that was important to me. I got a lot of self-satisfaction, I guess. Maybe I was stroking my ego in some way. I wanted to do well. I wanted to be the best lawyer ever born. I didn't get that well. I didn't get there, but that was important to me. And that's why, frankly, when I came back after this summer in Europe, where I'd hitchhiked for 3 months, and I came back to college after that, then in my mind, it's get to law school,
Right.
get a good job. And I thought this fun guy, the hitchhiker guy, I really liked him. I learned to like that guy a lot because he was more fun than I was. And I liked him, but I figured, okay, he's done, because now it's time, now it's time to be an adult, to get a job and to earn money and to develop a career, and et cetera. I figured I might not really have time to go do anything exciting until, I don't know, 40 years later after you retire. At least that was the plan in sort of my mid 20s. Okay, it's time to get serious and to buckle down. But that again changed as well.
So you fed this guy for years and years and years. What was the moment that the other guy said, hold up, it's my turn?
Yeah, and this does, I think, relate to Carpe Diem, to your. This is why Tiffany matched us together at the conference, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Is when I was maybe 29 years old, I was working at a big law firm in Washington, D.C. It was fun. It was a lot of work, but it was fun. They had some really high-profile, fun clients like fashion designer Gucci and M&M Mars, the candy maker. And I was litigating cases for clients like that, Gucci and M&M Mars. And if you're a young lawyer, that's kind of heady to be doing that. Flying around the country, visiting all the M&M Mars manufacturing facilities. That's a kick,
That's
and,
a lot of
and
chocolate.
a lot of chocolate, and in a lot of ways, I was right where I planned to be for like the last 15 years. From the time I was 13 years old and I said, I'm going to be a lawyer, I was there and I felt good about it. But that's sort of when this guy started talking, because you could just see that if you go too far down this road too soon, you'll never get off this track. And as much as I had worked to be there, it isn't satisfying in the same way we were talking about earlier. That's not what you really live for. You work hard, you make money, you do things in order to open the doors for what really give you satisfaction and pleasure, for your passion. And I realize I'm 29 years old. I'm unmarried. I have no kids. I correctly predicted that someday I probably would be married and someday I would have kids. And that will change life differently. And I won't have flexibility to go do something crazy. But I did have flexibility to go do something crazy when I was 29. And so although I was in the job that was in a way perfect, and was right on track to be where I wanted to be for the rest of my life, I quit this law firm when I was 29 years old, flying around the world, having a great time. And it was both voices talking, but fortunately, this guy won and said, go do this now, because you will not have opportunities forever to go do something crazy. And so crazy ended up being quitting this job and going to Asia for 9 months. I went really thinking it'd be 6 months. I basically was going to spend all my money until I was out of money. But by then I'd become pretty good at traveling really cheaply. And certainly at that time, a lot of parts of Asia were real cheap to travel with. And so I spent 9 months backpacking around Asia, and then came back and tried to resuscitate my career.
Was it different to backpack in Asia versus Europe versus the United States? What sort of different protocols or how did they work? The same?
Uh, well, it's kind of hard to say. I will say the one thing that is interesting that some people don't realize is a lot of Asia speaks some English. We think it's the other side of the world. It is the other side of the world, but there's actually quite a lot of countries there that speak some English. And part of that's the old, British Empire, Malaysia and Hong Kong and what was then Burma, Myanmar. They spoke English from their colonial history. The Philippines obviously speaks a lot of English because for a long time they were, an American territory. And so there's actually quite a few places where you could speak some English. And so that in that regard, it was a little bit easier than I expected. On the other hand, we were in China in 1985. And I mean, that was very, very difficult traveling. There was no English to speak of. It's not their job to speak English. It's my job to try to speak Chinese, which is impossible. You can't, I didn't do that very well. But traveling in China was very, very difficult because, this was back when China was mainland China, or was called Red China. Mao had been dead for a while, but it still was largely a Maoist culture. When we were there in 1985, there were a whole lot of people still wearing, sort of the gray, what they called, Mao suits, the sort of the proletarian garb. And that was just sort of a reminder that I was in a very different place. And of course, you stood out physically. It's pretty clear that you're a tourist. Especially if you're as pale and freckled as I am, you'd stand out. But I kind of always liked that. I didn't really mind standing out. Sometimes that'll get you help because people know you need help.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it opens some doors. It closes some, but it also opens some. So your money ran out. You turned around, did you go back to Arizona or to DC or where'd you go?
I went back to DC because that's where I still had some contacts, some connections. I got home. I didn't go back to work right away. Psychologically, it was kind of hard to think about jumping back into a library after I'd spent 9 months backpacking in Asia. So I took a few more months, and then I tried, and this gets us to ultimately how you and I crossed paths. Then I spent some time trying to write a book, mostly about the travels I had just had in Asia in 1985, sort of a travel memoir, but also reflecting back on some of the other things that I had done hitchhiking. I didn't hitchhike in Asia because, you just didn't hitchhike in Asia. And a lot of those countries didn't have enough private cars to make it worth it. And by then I'm 29 years old. I think hitchhiking has a short life. It's sort of like Olympic gymnasts. There's only a few years they're really good Olympic gymnasts and they get too old. I think it's also true for hitchhiking. By the time I'm 29 years old and I had been a big fancy lawyer, the idea of hitchhiking just didn't seem right anymore. It sure did when I was younger, and that was great. And then you move on to something different. But when I got back, I wrote a whole lot of what I thought would be a book about what I think were pretty interesting, unique adventures, sometimes on the other side of the world, sometimes far off the grid, in a time when there really was no grid, way before the internet, way before you could get Google Maps to tell you where to go or get online and find out how to get a place to stay or anything. It was a different universe to be traveling back then. But I wrote a lot about it, but I didn't finish. And this is material. I didn't finish in part because I was really, really, really broke and I needed to go back to work. And so I went and I got a job and I went back.
Well, about that, I'm really curious because law firms are extremely competitive and you have to be very driven to get ahead. So what did taking months off of stepping aside from that track, what did that do to your career?
That's a great question. I had a little bit of hubris when I got back. I thought that employers would like the idea of having somebody who'd shown a little independence and gone something different. That wasn't the way it worked at all.
No.
Law is a conservative profession. Maybe not so much now. I don't know, but certainly then it was a pretty conservative profession.
Sure.
And employers saw me no longer as sort of the high achieving guy. They saw me as the irresponsible guy who'd been gone who hadn't worked for a year.
Yeah.
And
because your billables wouldn't be great coming back, right?
oh, I didn't have clients, of course. I didn't have anything. All I had was I thought I was still a good lawyer, but it was just really revealing. You know, it's sort of sobering. And so what's interesting is I ended up taking a job at 30 years old, an entry level job, a government job with the Securities and Exchange Commission, and for a little while, that was really a big step back. You know, I had Stanford.
So you were pushing a mail cart? Is that what you were doing? That's what I think when I hear entry level.
Entry level legal job. It probably didn't feel a whole lot different than that, you know.
Yeah.
But it was humbling to a degree. I had Stanford classmates by then who were almost becoming partners in big law firms, and here I am, an entry level job with the Securities and Exchange Commission. So
is that like a second chair? You go and carry briefcases?
Oh man, probably third chair if they even had it. Yeah, right briefs, just nothing but right briefs, you know.
Yeah.
And so I think for a little while there, people probably thought, well, Wake blew it, you know. He had it all, and now he's way back at the beginning. But you know, but it only takes a couple of years for you. Once you're back on the merry-go-round, then you can change horses, you know. And it took that move clearly set my career back a few years. But that's it. Only a few years. Within a few years, I was back to where I would have been. I ended up moving to Denver and having what I think was a very successful career. And it was taking a year. Well, actually, it became a year and a half off. Was in the long run, way more beneficial than having spent another year and a half working. You know, and so I look at that. I mean, there were times where I had some second guessing, but not very long. And it's very, very clear to me that carpe diem, you know, if you have an opportunity, take it if it's your passion. And I did, and I am extremely grateful. There's a lot of things we do in life. You know, we have passions for a few years or decades or whatever. You go through different phases in life. But I look back at that as absolutely one of the best decisions I ever made. Not while I was in Washington, not just in my life, because I have memories from 9 months in Asia that I will never get rid of, you know. And had I been working in a library or litigating cases during that year and a half, I would have forgotten all of that. I promise you,
sure.
you know. And so, I mean, you know what that's like. And so that's, you know, yeah, I don't regret that one bit.
Well, you married. You have three sons?
I do. I have three
What did
sons.
you do? Yeah. Are they travelers?
Not to the same degree I was. It was kind of interesting, you know, when I moved to Denver, then I met my wife Lane and we got married, and we had our first son, Corey, and then a year and a half later, we had two more sons. We had identical twin sons, Sean and Kevin, and so we went from no kids to 3 kids in a year and a half, and that's sort of in conjunction with the time I'm getting back into developing a practice and building a law firm and that sort of thing. So that was pretty demanding. But yeah, three great sons. They're now 30, and 2 of them are 29.
Wow.
And you know, they're in business and in engineering because they, you know, they're all numbers guys to one degree or another, so
Yeah.
and a couple of them are still here in Denver, so that's nice. My wife is retired, and so you know we're we're into where you are. We get more flexibility to decide what we want to do.
That's great. Well, and she, I think you told me that she actually kind of pushed you out of the nest to begin traveling again.
You were talking before about how what it is and what's your passion and what gives you the real satisfaction in life. We got to this point. I'm maybe 50 years old, and like I say, we're raising 3 kids that are almost sort of the same age, and that's a great thing, right? But it's work, and I'm building up a practice. You're at the prime of your career when you're in your 50s, even your early 50s, and um, I think it's possible. It's hard to imagine, but I think it's possible that I wasn't very fun to be around there for, between the work and kids and everything else. Um, Everyone goes through it, so I'm no different than anyone else. Your child raising years coincide with some of your most intense working years,
Sure.
and um, I, I think I was stressed out. And one day my wife just said, "You need to go somewhere. You just need to take off." She knew about the history. Most of that travel, all of that really exotic travel, was before we even met. But believe it or not, I had bored her with a story here or there once in a while about the old days, um, and she saw it before I did. She saw the problem before I did, and she said, "You need to go somewhere. Don't worry about us. The kids will be fine. I'll be fine. You need to go somewhere far away. Where do you want to go?" And I said, "Well, I've always wanted to go see Angkor Wat in Cambodia." And she said, "Do it." And so when I was like 50 or 51, I took a couple of weeks um, and went to Cambodia. Did 4 or 5 days of dirt biking in the Cambodian jungles. Went to Angkor Wat and various other places. And that was because Lane, you know, like I say, she saw it before I did. She pinpointed it, and she was very supportive in doing that. And so it's not just that you have to have the opportunities to take advantage to satisfy your passions. Sometimes you need support to get it done. And in that case, my wife, she was a support. She made sure I got it done. And so therefore, thereafter, every couple of years or something, she would say, "It's time. You need to go somewhere." Which is,
Nice.
on the one hand, extraordinary, generous of her. On the other hand, maybe she was thinking, "It's time to get a little break from this guy for a little."
That's funny. I don't know how you felt while you were working. I could not conceive that I'd ever do anything else. Did you have an awareness that there was going to come a point where it would stop and you'd move on to a new phase?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Did you?
Oh, yeah. Um, you it sounds like you you enjoyed what you were doing, and it was rewarding. Um, and I knew I was lucky in certain ways. I had a lot of flexibility. I had my own business. I made good money, but I didn't love it. I didn't love it. I got professional satisfaction from it, but I didn't love it. And so I always knew that when we were able, I would quit. And actually, when the time came that I did retire, I retired hard stop. One day I'm working full time. The next day I'm working zero time, and I never build another hour after that. With lawyers, especially, senior lawyers, it's pretty easy to taper off, go half time, do some consulting, just wind down a little bit. And I totally get that. It's easy, but that wasn't the way I was going to do it. In fact, when I retired a week before I turned 60, and on my 60th birthday, I was on the summit of Kilimanjaro with one of my twin sons, Kevin.
Nice.
And you, I didn't want to be having to phone back and do meetings and blah blah blah. So,
Yeah.
in a way, I envy people like you who you were enjoying what you're doing, such that you could imagine not doing it. I could
Well,
always
and I
I could
think
always
it's a
imagine not
matter of
doing it.
It's a matter of the person on your shoulder being fed
Ah,
adequately and sufficiently that you can't imagine starving that person.
mm.
That was me.
But you kept up even after you retired, though. You've dabbled in the same arena in some
Oh my
ways,
gosh,
right?
I went back to work.
Ah,
And
okay.
it was a half-time job that turned into over a full-time job.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, I've always had trouble imagining things would be any different than they are right now.
Hmm.
You know, my child would never, well, first I'd never get married. I'd never have children. My child would never talk or walk, you know. I just didn't imagine it. So I think, let me take you back to your quote. And your quote was, though you didn't see it coming, your destiny was to be destitute at 30. But you weren't destitute at 30. Explain what you mean.
Well, that's a good point. I was destitute in only the most literal financial sense.
Briefly.
Briefly, I got
Briefly.
back and I was broke,
Yeah.
um, and uh, and that's the only way. I still had all the experience. I still had, I think, the ability to get back. But compared to where I had been a couple years before that, it was sort of a slap in the face. But willingly, and I would certainly do it again. Um, but you know, I think for people who watch your podcast or who are thinking about, do I take this leap? Do I take this sharp left turn? How do I evaluate the pros and the cons? Obviously, it is really tough. Other people have very different passions, whether it's gardening or poetry, or there's a million different passions you can have. My passion at the time, and almost still now, was travel and as far away as possible. Almost, the more exotic, the better. But
Mhm.
but um, you know, I think you have to recognize when you have an opportunity, and because you can't plan when the opportunity is coming. It's easy to say, well, a year from now it'd be a little bit better to do whatever I'm toying with doing, or if I can accomplish this before I accomplish that would be better. But I don't want to sound too Pollyanna, but life doesn't really work that way. I think if you get the opportunity, you just got to realize that you're lucky enough to have the opportunity, and take it. And it's not just that. In my case, I had fun doing it. I've said before, that time I spent off when I was 29, 30, I'm not sure if it's the best time of my life, because you can evaluate best in a lot of different ways. Raising your kids is your best, or meeting your wife is best, or career successes are one. There's lots of different ways to define best. But I would unquestionably say that the most fun year I ever had in my life was when had quit the law firm and I went to Asia for 9 months. That was the most fun I ever had. And that's great in its own right. But the other advantage to it is, and I don't know about you, Terry, but I think that, I'm 68. When I was 48, I thought 68 would stink. When I was
Okay.
28, I thought 68 would stink,
Yeah.
right? You'd think that you're going to have one foot in the grave. Well, 68 doesn't stink. The 60s are great. I think they're great as long as you're healthy. But one of the negatives, in my opinion, as we get older, is that we have more time to think about things that we should have done differently, right? It's almost human nature to think, oh, I should have done this, or why didn't I do that? What was I thinking when I did that? When you're 10 years old, you don't have a whole lot of life experiences to reflect back on. But, when we get to a certain age, we have a lot of life experiences to reflect back on. And it's human nature to think, oh, why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? Well, when I look back at 28, I never for a second think I made a mistake. And that could have gone either way. There was this guy saying, hey, go screw around for a year. You're young. And this guy saying, don't give away your career. You worked your whole life for this. I could have gone with this one, and I still would have had a great life and been lucky in so many ways. But had I done that, I would have spent the next 40 years thinking, oh, damn, I blew that. Why didn't I take advantage of that opportunity? So now I don't have that. There's plenty of things you can look back and think you screwed up. There's plenty of things I know I screwed up. That's not one of them. That's not one of them. It's great to be freed of that regret. So you not only get the good news from going off and doing what you want to do with your passion, you get a twofer. You also get to the point where you're free of any regret or remorse for not doing it.
Well, so I was not a Catholic growing up. I was a Baptist, which has its own um, issues. But I will never forget a pastor talking about visiting an old man who was dying in the hospital. And of course, his main job was to give him the gospel and try and get him saved before he went off. And everything he said, the man would yell, "It's too late! It's too late!" I hear that in my head. And so I've developed a list of things that
Ah,
I will not regret at the end and say, why didn't I do that? I think destiny is the thing that you were born to do. And so I would suggest that you did what you had to, but in that great wrestling match, destiny won out because
mm,
now look at you, right?
yeah, there's, um, I know I'm very lucky. And, um, in part it's because I went and I did the things that were important to me at the time, just enough to get me through into where it becomes easier. I mean, we travel a lot now. We're retired. My wife and I do travel a lot, and there's things that if she doesn't want to do them, I do them by myself. You can go off and do things separately, um, but yeah, you got to. Um, I guess it's sort of a philosophical question:
Sure,
is destiny? What is your destiny?
sure.
I don't know.
Well, so take a minute, if you would, and look straight into the camera and talk to that person who there's something they've always wanted to do, but they've never had the time. They've never made it a priority. Talk to that person.
Well, there are, I'm sure, I know there are lots of situations where people really don't even have the option.
Yeah.
Um, they don't have the financial ability, they don't have the health. There's lots of things that are on the wish list that will always only be wishes, and that's nobody's fault.
Right.
We can't be blamed for that because there are things that are out of our control. But what I think is that there are going to be some occasions where it is in your control, and there may have to be some sacrifice to make it work. In my case, it was, having my career take a hit for a couple of years, although if that ended up not being, there may be a price you have to pay to make it work. But if you have that opportunity, you have to go do it. And again, it sounds kind of Pollyannish to say, but I really think you not only get, if it's your passion, if it's a, if it's a, oh, I might like that. Oh, that could be fun. That's a different ballgame, and the pros and the cons, the cost benefit analysis of that are way different. I don't even know how to quantify those. But if you know it's your passion, if you know it's the kind of thing you're going to get something out of, and just as importantly, it's the kind of thing you're going to regret for the next 10 or 20 or 50 years not doing it, then if you can make it happen, then you got to make it happen. If you cannot make it happen for whatever, like I say, reason, health or reason or family, financial reasons, we get that. But if you have the ability to make it happen, then, um, what they say, you only live once, right? It's like this guy in this story you were just talking about. It's too late. It's too late. Go get it done before it's too late.
Well, I can't wait to read your book. And I hope that there is some portion of it dedicated to sharing that message, because I think a lot of people read things like that because they want to be inspired because they've always felt they had a destiny, or maybe it's not a destiny, maybe it's a relationship that needs to be healed. Maybe it's a cause working to, I don't know, protect the environment, or advance livestock handling practices, whatever it is. um, I think that we read because we want to see a reflection of what we ourselves could do.
Mm.
And it's entertaining, yeah, but it's also an opportunity to delicately make a point and suggest. So that's my flag that I carry. But I've loved everything that you've said. Um, I guess finally we're getting toward the end of it here. This has been really fun.
It's been a blast.
I would like to ask you, is there anything that I didn't ask that you wish that I had that you want to talk about now?
Um, I don't know. I think anything else I might add would start to get a little too preachy. Um,
And you don't
because
seem the preachy type.
you know, I know that I have been very lucky. I've been very lucky, and I think I think there will be a book. Part of the reason there's a book is, like I say, I wrote all this stuff 35 years ago, and then I like to say I didn't finish it. As I like to say, I got distracted for 35 years, and
It
then
wasn't right.
it wasn't right.
right.
It wasn't right. It wasn't right. And maybe now it's right. But the beauty of it was, now that when I pull it out, it's like I have these time capsules of what the travel world was like way back then. It allows people to go back and see what it was like back then, and so maybe that's my new destiny. My new destiny is to record some of it in a way, and get it out. And that's sort of the next project. And I don't get paid for it, but it's still fun.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, I like to think of us writers sometimes as sponges, and you absorb and absorb, and at some point you have to get wrung out. And that to me is what writing is. It's the wringing out, so you can go back out and do more. I will say, if we have any agents, book publishers listening, I've read a couple of chapters. Dan is an excellent writer. He tells a good story and he writes a good story. And so I would encourage you to get a hold of Dan. Dan, how can people get in touch with you?
Thanks a lot. People will be able to get me on the web at danwake.com soon. But in the meantime, hey, if anyone has anything to brainstorm, it's daniel.wake@icloud.com. Like wake up in the morning. So.
Nice. Well, if you and your wife get up to Boise, you are welcome to stop by and spend some time with us.
Thanks so much.
Professor and I would love that.
We'll get there.
Yay. I'm going to hold you to that. Don't come now. It's burning. You can't breathe outside. There's so much smoke. But
I shouldn't laugh, but I know what you mean. We have the same issues in Colorado.
yeah. Well,
Okay.
Thank you again.
Thanks, Jerry. It's really a lot of fun. I've never done this before, and my wife says I never met a microphone I didn't like, and apparently that's true, because all I did was blab for however long we've been on this.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Jerry. Bye.
Take care.